Hello again, and may I first say thank you for some excellent discussion in this class so far. I've been really impressed by your ability to jump into Aldrich's work, pull out some of those key concepts and ideas that he presents, and then apply them not only in a historical perspective, but to our parties as they exist today. You've also done a really great job at keeping that approach fairly nonpartisan, and that's not always the easiest thing to do, especially as we are discussing something like political parties that have been part of our system for the entirety of its existence, and even to this day becomes something that is so intrinsic to a person's identity that the ability to identify as a member of a political party makes it very difficult to then take a step back and evaluate whether those parties are really the best thing to exist in a democracy. This question of why parties is going to be really fundamental to our understanding the rest of this class. You can't examine political parties as they exist today without understanding how they got here. We can't look at the electoral process, which we are in the midst of and have an election coming up on the 3rd of November, without being able to understand the influence that political parties has had on that process. Everything we see today is determined by the motions of the political parties in the past. As we finish our examination of Aldrich's work, I'd like us to take the opportunity to apply his conclusions to real-world circumstances. As many of you know, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away on Friday, and while the nation would like time to mourn the loss of such a respected and influential political figure, questions have already begun to arise as to what will happen next. You may recall from your Constitution a fairly straightforward process. The President nominates a replacement to the Supreme Court, and the Senate confirms them. However, that process has become more complicated over time. For instance, in 1955, the Senate Judiciary Committee requested an interview with the candidate before passing along their recommendations to the Senate floor. Since that time, every nominee has sat for a Senate hearing before their confirmation. As recently as 2016, the question has arisen of whether it is proper for the Senate to confirm a nominee in the last year of a president's 4-year term. Specifically, whether after the primary process has begun for a presidential election, if they should wait for whoever wins that election to have their nomination. In other words, attempting to allow the American people to have a voice in the selection of a Supreme Court justice. That is going to be very prescient today, as we are currently sitting in a significantly shorter amount of time from a presidential election. We're sitting just about 6.5 weeks out from the presidential election taking place, and that's significantly shorter than the amount of time that was considered in Merrick Garland's case. So we face a major question, and I'm going to ask this question in the sake of our discussion in a couple of different ways. I want to ask first, what should the Republican senators do? And second, what should the Democratic senators do? Now, there are several considerations to take into account in answering these questions. The first is a consideration of timing. Should the Senate Republicans have confirmation hearings before the presidential election on the 3rd of November? Should they wait until after and do it between the presidential election and the inauguration on the 20th of January? Or should they wait until after the inauguration to hold the confirmation hearings? This is a decision that will primarily be made by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and he has a lot of things to take into consideration. First of all, the average length of time for a Supreme Court nomination is about 2.3 months. There is significantly less time available right now if the Senate Republicans want to have those confirmation hearings before the presidential election. In other words, looking at this time frame of just about 6 weeks. Consider that the Senate Majority Leader also would not want his Republican colleagues to be in Senate the week before a national election. Many of them have their seats up for grabs right now, so they need to be campaigning. That leaves a period of just around 35 days from right now to consider the confirmation of a Supreme Court justice, which would be an unprecedented push for our system. We also have to consider consider how the public would view the Senate in this circumstance. Given the staunch refusal in 2016 to hold confirmation hearings prior to a presidential election, and that was in a significantly longer period of time, what kind of hypocrisy would it convey if the Senate chose not to follow those same rules now? The only change being that we have a different president of a different political party. Also, holding such a fast confirmation process could have the unintended effect of really energizing the Democratic base, as they may see this as something that is directly preferential to a Republican president. On the other hand, there are some upsides to holding the confirmations so quickly. For one, you guarantee that President Trump is still the president. As you may know, there is a chance for President Trump to be defeated on the 3rd of November and enter a lame duck period between the election and the inauguration of a new president. During that time, as we've seen historically, presidential approval ratings and the approval of any action of the president's party tend to fall dramatically. So if McConnell wants any guarantee of some public support, there is a very good reason to hold that confirmation hearing now. Also, the faster these hearings are held, the less ability that the Democrats would have to enact any kind of obstruction to those hearings. That may contribute to some of your answer in the other question. If hearings begin within the next week, the Democrats have very little time to do anything to respond to or object to those hearings. Basically, just about the only thing that could possibly interrupt those hearings would be if there was a successful impeachment brought about by the House Democrats. Now, that's certainly a possibility and something you may consider in your other question. If the House Democrats were to begin an impeachment for, say, Attorney General Barr, would that then override already existing Senate confirmation hearings once it has been passed through the House? That's something you can consider for the other question. Now, if you move into the period between the election and the inauguration, some of those challenges are flipped, but also some of those benefits are lost. The possibility of confirming the nominee from a lame duck president does not have a very good outward face when it comes to public opinion. But you also have the ability to implement a more fair and a more standard process for this confirmation hearing. If you suggest the third time frame, which is waiting until after the inauguration, there are bigger problems and also bigger benefits. Considering that it would be consistent with previously established rules in the Senate, there's much less of a risk of challenge from the opposition party to wait until that time. However, you run the risk that both Mitch McConnell and President Trump could have lost their positions, meaning that you may no longer have the ability to even make that choice, and you now have a new president nominating a new Supreme Court justice to be confirmed. Next, you have a consideration of vote tally. Typically, you don't put a vote to the Senate floor without knowing that you have the majority support in order for it to pass. I'm assuming that the filibuster rule is still inoperative. Originally, it required a 60-person majority, whereas now you have a simple majority of 51 votes required to pass. And even there's a little bit of flexibility. If the Republicans got 50 votes and it tied Democratic 50 votes, it would go to the vice president for a tiebreak, which I'm assuming Mike Pence would not reject the nomination that President Trump put forward. So that even leaves you a little bit of room in a couple of senators who may want to maintain their 2016 position and abstain from voting, which is something that both Senators Collins and Murkowski have already indicated that they would like to do. There is a little bit of a hiccup here, though. We have to consider the special election circumstances in Arizona, where Senator McSally is currently losing to a Democratic challenger, and that seat may change as soon as November 20th. So as we move further along in the timeline, some of those numbers start to seem a little more unsettled, and you may not be able to as easily establish the base to pass a confirmation vote. Now, of course, on the other hand, you may have a benefit of waiting longer if the election determines that there's going to continue to be a Republican majority in the Senate. So it may be a firmer stance to actually wait and establish a Republican hold on both the Senate and the presidency before you confirm this next Supreme Court justice. With that as just some of the basic considerations that the Senate Republicans currently face in making this decision, I also want to speak a little bit about some of the challenges that Democrats may face in responding to this. Senator Chuck Schumer has already indicated that nothing is off the table as far as Democratic response. Whether that includes attempts to obstruct the process, should it be viewed as going through too quickly, or if that means responses under the next presidency, it is yet to be determined. So should they start impeachment proceedings? As I previously mentioned, there have been calls for the impeachment of Attorney General Barr, and yet doing it as a response to a potential Senate confirmation could be viewed as highly partisan. Should they attempt to shut down the government? As we previously have under budgetary constraints, both the Democrats and Republicans have seen government shutdowns in the past decade as a result of their policy. That would be something that they could do to prevent this. Should they just leave DC? If all of the Senate Democrats are gone for legitimate reasons, something like the Senate Judiciary Committee couldn't meet properly. So what best option do they have? Should they wait for the next president? Should they hope that Joe Biden will win, and in that case, maybe push for something like the expansion of the Supreme Court? Allow this confirmation to go through and give the Supreme Court what would be perceived as a conservative majority, and then do as other presidents have done in the past and expand the court by a few members. You may recall, under the original Constitution, the only rules are that the Supreme Court must be more than 5 people, and it must be an odd number. So if Joe Biden, under the pretense of rebalancing the court or claiming that President Trump's nominations were political, could add 2 members to the Supreme Court and nominate 2 more justices. All of these are possibilities, and I'm just starting here. I'm just throwing out some ideas of things that you may consider in your response to these questions. So I would like you to, in our discussion, respond to both. Tell me in as apolitical as a possible way, what do you see as the best options for the Republicans? And what do you see as then the best options for the Democrats? What could likely happen going forward if there is a confirmation process begun immediately? I'll throw out a final prediction for those of you who stuck around. I think Amy Coney Barrett from the 7th Circuit is going to be Trump's nomination for the Supreme Court. So we'll see if I'm right. We'll see if I'm wrong. Either way, I'll see you in the discussion, and I hope you have a great day.